Welcome back to the channel, Flipper Troops, and if you're new to the channel, welcome to Break the Backlog, the show where I sit down and provide my thoughts, opinions, and personal stories about a particular game that I've been playing. Today's game is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the continued retold tale of the 2020 release Final Fantasy VII Remake. This game marks yet another new release from 2024 that I finished, and it was a journey indeed. I wasn't really sure if I was going to actually review this game or not, to be completely honest. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding the game and some of the creative direction that the team is taking moving forward, especially in the narrative department. In a lot of these discussions, you don't have to look very hard or far to find people getting some pretty nasty replies for simply liking this game, or people having their childhoods and experiences trivialized and stomped on for feeling like this game isn't what they wanted it to be. And there are totally reasons to criticize this game or love this game, and subjective reasons for not liking some of these decisions or loving them, which is totally fair. However, some have taken their opinions to the absolute max. As always, when a game this divisive releases, three camps of people have sprouted up that have different stances on this game. There are the two poles of the spectrum, with the cringe OG superfans who go into a rage and kind of just attack anyone at the first sign of them enjoying anything new being added to the beloved experience they had. And the equally cringe at times Final Fantasy VII Rebirth stalwart defenders who will say that this is the perfect game with no flaws whatsoever. Both groups are incredibly frustrating to interact with because both groups try to smother out or harass those whose opinions don't 100% align with their own. And I get it. It can feel bad to have someone make criticisms over a game that you paid $70 for, and that you feel that you need to defend your purchase. Surely this hard-earned money couldn't have gone to a game of flaws, right? Surely you wouldn't have been duped and dared to waste your time and your hard-earned doubloons on a game that isn't absolutely perfect, right? On the other hand, I get the gatekeeping, never-satisfied conservationists who exist in every fandom of every type of media ever created. These people, a lot of times, just identify with the media in question very heavily, so much so that it's become a piece of them, something they consider vitally important to the person they are today. They, too, struggle with making criticisms, though it's usually about the old days and how nothing back then was ever wrong, or there could be no flaws in anything from back in the day. And they can often be found rejecting any new ideas, conversations, opinions, and new voices in the space, as these people would never truly get it or understand them. To disagree with these people is to make it a personal attack on them, as you are hurting the game, in this case, that has become baked into who they are. Rather than a hobby, they are OG Final Fantasy VII, and how dare Square Enix for making any changes to the original game, and furthermore, how dare you for not riding with them. Now, in the middle is where I would expect most of us would be, it's almost where I'd hope most of us would be, and I do think that that's the case. These two poles, as I called them, of the spectrum are just the vocal minorities on either end. But I'd hope that most of us would be here in the middle, where we haven't hard-coded a video game into our DNA so much that it's become the only pillar of our personality, and that we can make some not emotionally charged overreactions to either end of the spectrum and talk sensibly about a game while acknowledging that it has flaws and strengths. You know, normal, well-adjusted people. Because of this, I'm going to go ahead and just put a trigger warning here, because this video will contain positive opinions about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's also going to contain some criticism about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well. At the end of the day, I'm just going to talk about my opinion of the game, and it's really, really stupid that I have to say this next part because it's obvious since this is a subjective review, but because some of the aforementioned camps of people see differing opinions as personal attacks on them, it has become a normal part of video game culture to lead a review of a divisive topic like this with the following statement. This is my opinion, and it's okay if you don't agree with it. Once again, we're not talking about people who can have these conversations about games where their opinions may differ. This specific section and these warnings are more aimed at people who think that they have to attack others because of the opinion of pixels on a screen and their opinions of how those pixels move and what those pixels mean. Loving this game is okay. Hating this game is okay. Liking this game is okay. Being disappointed by this game is okay. What isn't okay is lashing out at anyone who doesn't think that this game is the second coming of Christ or carry the pitchfork and anger that video games haven't stayed the same since 30 years ago. I'm not interested in talking about how this game is the most perfect game ever or the worst game ever, because neither of these statements are true in my opinion. I'm also not interested in the sales numbers don't lie argument, as it doesn't really take into account any of the other factors that may have led to a decrease in sales. Not to mention, I don't have to go find other people's opinions that support my own just to justify that I like something. I'm not going to point at a fucking graph and say, this is why I like the game. It's just lame. If that's the case, then I guess Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are some of the best in the series based on their sales numbers, which we all know is not the case. If a game sells 2 copies and I enjoy it, pointing out that the numbers are low isn't going to change my mind. Sales numbers are a metric that could be indicative of an overall desire for a game, but they're also a value that can be affected by many different things, like the amount of exclusive consoles that are out there in the world versus the last-gen console who sold extremely well. I think that by far the dumbest argument made against Rebirth, and the one that really made me include this portion into the intro of my video, was seeing that some people were saying that Square Enix including a diverse population of people meant that they were somehow forcing a woke agenda down our throats, when there are literally NPC characters of all skin tones in the original game. They were hyperfixated on the race of the NPC characters. I always find these arguments in gaming to be really strange, and oftentimes they just come off as you self-reporting more than anything else. It's just baffling that this continues to be an attitude about gaming diversity when the world itself is diverse. We're also talking about a video game where a pretty little emo boy swings around a 7-foot chunk of steel, a man has a Gatling gun prosthetic for his arm, and a dog can talk. I don't see why we're drawing the line at race. Just seems stupid, to be honest. Okay, sorry about all that housekeeping. I've just seen a lot of the extreme opinions and reactions to this game, and people putting each other down for not agreeing with each other, and people making threats. It happened to like a bigger YouTuber that had done some like theory crafting videos, and I think this is just ridiculous. Every time this happens, it just makes the whole community look bad, and then you have people popping up saying that the Final Fantasy VII fandom is toxic and disgusting, and they're degenerates, or, you know, put in any game like that, Pokemon, whatever. And I think it's just sad that we can't just have conversations without getting like that emotional about it. It's just weird. I really enjoyed the original Final Fantasy VII story, and it was that love of the story and its characters that I experienced for the first time about a month ago that made me want to play these remakes, which I also enjoyed. If you have a different opinion, totally fine. Let's talk about it respectfully in the comments below. I would love to hear some thoughts on this. Without further ado, let's find out if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth builds upon the concepts of its predecessor while still honoring the original game's legacy. Sit back, relax, and grab a snack as we break the backlog on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a 2024 action RPG in which the player continues on with the story of ex-soldier Cloud Strife and his ragtag group of friends as they enter the massive world outside of Midgar, the city where the first game takes place. It is a second title in a planned trilogy of games whose goal have been to take Final Fantasy VII's story and step out of 1997, bringing it into the modern gaming world with a new facelift, different gameplay, and combat styles, and as of Rebirth, some massive new directions for the story. Now, real quick before we get into the review proper, I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to cover in this review too many things at depth that are still kind of the same from Remake, and I'll still mention them, but it's going to be like kind of glancing over them and then really just expanding upon things that I've noticed that were different, whether they be better or worse. It took me around 55 hours to do some of the side content and finish the main story, and now let's talk about how those 55 hours went. Rebirth's visuals were something I feel kind of mixed about due to their inconsistencies at times. These were almost immediately noticeable, and while on my first look I thought that this game looked worse than Remake, it wasn't until I messed around in photo mode and progressed a few hours in the game and did a little bit of research that what was noticeably ugly seemed to be down to lighting effects in different areas. The cool toned sunlight of Nibelheim, for instance, washed Cloud out, making his face look like he was carved out of Play-Doh as his dead little eyes stare out into the world. The way that the lighting does Cloud by far in this game is its worst offense. It is not flattering for Cloud. Sometimes he really just looks soulless and very odd in some portions of the game, which just immediately threw me off. I got about 30 minutes in before I was Googling to see if anyone else thought this game looked worse than Remake, because I had heard really good things about it and how wonderful this game looked as a true next-gen title. Luckily, I found out about this being a lighting issue, and I did begin to notice in more dimly lit or warmly lit areas this was far less noticeable, and it is easy to see that a lot of the characters actually had more detail to them than they did in Remake, just the lighting can really screw them over. The texture of Cloud's sweater thing that he wears, for instance, had a plush look where you can kind of see the thread texture, and it was a detail that I found really nice on the eyes. This extends to a lot of the clothing within the game, like the red denim of Aerith's jacket that she dons over her dress. As for other positives I noticed, I also found that switching the game from the mode on the PS5 that focuses on how good the game looks to the mode that focuses more on making it a 60 FPS experience made a huge difference, as the increased frames made an immediate impact and made for a much more fluid experience. It never feels like that 60 FPS versus 30 FPS thing matters in games until you see it side by side, and then it really matters. Also, the in-game cutscenes luckily do not suffer from the lighting bug for the most part, and aside from some occasional texture pop-in happening during these cutscenes and the more cinematic ones, and traveling out in the open, this game does look pretty good. This was pretty relieving, as my initial fear was that I was going to be disappointed if this game looked much worse than Remake, which I thought it did at first, as there has been a console generation and 4 years of time between those two games. Outside of these issues, the game does continue a lot of the high points from Remake's art direction and style, with spells and ability effects still being as explosive and impressive as ever, dedication made to including a level of attention to detail to recreating the locales within the game, and character designs that, when the lighting allows, look pretty solid. Cutscenes here are also as beautiful as ever, and there were some seamless transitions between in-game cutscenes and the more cinematic, more beautiful cutscenes that reminded me of how the original Final Fantasy VII did this a lot. All things considered, the visuals are a bit of a mixed bag at times, though I found that their positives did outweigh their negatives when they were hitting their high notes. Oh man, the soundtrack is so back, baby. There are many iconic Final Fantasy VII songs taken up to 11 in quality for Rebirth that just made me so happy that I took the time out to play the classic 7 first. This sentiment is pretty much carried throughout every aspect of this title, as just playing the original game will increase your enjoyment of this game if you enjoy this game, obviously. But the soundtrack is so good within this title, and the songs are so beautifully done while still taking the utmost care to preserve the iconic sonic identity of the original game's music. It was nice to see this was more so of a continuation of quality of music that started with the first remake game. It felt like there were far more tracks and diversity amongst said tracks, which makes sense as the party is traveling along an absolutely massive map with a vast variety of places contained within its boundaries. I love the music of the original 7, and it was really cool to hear more modern interpretations of these songs to go along with the story. These remixes on classic songs once again provide a wide emotional range with tracks covering a wide range in terms of vibe and feelings, which were especially noticeable within the larger world. There is one particular song that I felt like is an absolute masterpiece, though talking about the story context of it would be a pretty late game spoiler. What I can say is that a certain main character's theme begins the first phase of a boss fight, and as the battle wears on, the boss's theme slowly creeps in and takes over until the song is no longer the character's at all. This soundtrack is just once again a huge high mark in this remake's quality, and it was a beautiful companion to the story and gameplay. Much like the graphics, the sound effects for other things within this game are a bit of a mixed bag, but for a different reason. The overall quality is totally fine. Spells fire off with energy-packed cracks of lightning, or the shattering sound of blizzard magic just slamming against its foe. The sounds of the various abilities and weapons firing or being swung were also pretty solid and gave me no cause for complaint. My biggest issue here was that I noticed something that was kind of true in my playthrough of the original game. The mixing on some of the sounds can be pretty poor when they're in combination with the voice acting and music. What I mean by this is that during some of the more important or big fights, when dialogue plays, it can be easily smothered by the sound of an explosion or the swing of a fiend's massive arm or something. And while I get that this would be realistic and it'd make it harder to hear what your ally is saying in battle, I feel like many modern games choose to apply audio ducking to the sounds of battle and music when important dialogue is spoken in a fight. That just wasn't the case in some of these large battles, and it was noticeable. Luckily, I played with the subtitles on, but yeah, this was just something that did happen on more than one occasion, and while it could be addressed through using the in-game volume settings, I feel like out of the box, many of the games that I've played in recent years didn't need volume tweaking to be understood and enjoyed. Speaking of characters talking, how is it? Well, the cast from Remake returns with some obvious additions because of new characters, and they are once again stellar. The voice actors poured their souls into these performances, and I felt that the dialogue in Rebirth was even a bit better than in Remake. Specifically within the main cast, the writing and the way that the characters play off each other is just better. The party joke around with each other, the comedic timing of characters cracking jokes is a lot better, and a lot of the speaking time is used to flesh out characters and show how their bonds are deepening throughout their journey.
Who ties what rose? The one and only Yuffie!
Cool.
Hey, hold it.
There was some really fantastic performances within Rebirth, and this was yet another area of this game that had built upon the strengths of the previous entry. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the mechanics that are relatively the same that I talked about in my last review covering Remake. As this is a sequel, the gameplay here is very similar to Remake, though there are some pretty big changes to some aspects of it. The action combat and ATB system are still the same, though I felt like within the combat of Rebirth that characters moved at a quicker speed. This may just have been because the overall movement and verticality of Rebirth were both quicker and improved upon greatly, but I felt like the combat system too was just more fluid. What was an awesome addition to the combat were all of the new synergy moves, which allow two characters to team up for some pretty awesome looking combo moves that can lengthen the stagger time of an enemy or raise their limit levels, all while doing a ton of damage. These moves can be done by any combination of two characters as long as they have been unlocked using the new folio system, which is almost like the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X, though admittedly with a lot less choices and directions to move in. Another new addition to the combat that plays off of this is the backline commands, which give the party the ability to access synergy moves with non-active members of their team when the situation is dire. This was yet another great addition to the overall combat, and in addition to the non-active members attacking sometimes during fights from the background, These really help to create the feeling that this is a team and a group of friends who are all out here traveling the world, just not 3 at a time. This was a quick side note, but another thing that I enjoyed about this was that all the party members are visible as you travel around the world. The main party members sort of stick close to Cloud, but the others who are inactive still ride chocobos, still run a bit behind the main 3, and still interact with the rest of the group through dialogue. This choice to have them always included, as well as making sure that every member of the party gets some time in the story where they are forced into the party, helped it feel like the party was rotating in and out and that everyone got some love. The materia system still works the same and is still a really strong inclusion within this game, allowing characters to learn any spell or skill so long as they equip the proper materia to their equipment. Weapon abilities also make a return, with characters still being able to learn them permanently across all their weapons should they master their skills. So all in all, while the combat is similar, it's just an improved upon version of Remake's combat in almost every way, which worked for me. I really enjoyed this game's action combat, and I never found myself too bored or needing to take a break due to the longer fights. It was engaging, fluid, and fun. Outside of the combat, the introduction of side quests once again make their return, which I was a bit apprehensive about since the ones in Remake were pretty boring. There is some generic open world kind of slop here, like climbing towers to unlock info about the map, or finding all the collectathon style intel. Okay, most of Chadley's missions are just stuff where he wants you to gather information about stuff, and it's pretty boring. It's in many of the other side quests and activities here that shine and are massive improvements upon Remake's fetch quests. Most of this is down to the context and lore provided for these quests that provide information about the realm and its denizens. There are some quests here that even pair Cloud with one of his teammates and allow the two to get closer. Yes, there's a dating mechanic in this game. And these are by far the cream of the crop, as all of these quests provide a deeper look into the backstories and personalities of the party members. And in the spirit of open world and traveling around such a massive map, chocobos have been added to the mix, and the way that you wrangle them does harken back to the original in its own way. In the original game, you needed a materia to catch chocobos, and then you'd have to lure them in combat without angering them or before they could run away. This chocobo would then be yours until you got off of it, and then you would need to find another one when you wanted to travel by bird once again. In Rebirth, each region has its own chocobo that you can call upon whenever you want after you do their stealth-based mission to sneak past the rest of their little friends and wrangle it. These were a bit tedious sometimes, though I did like that once you got these chocobos, they were yours, and there was no need to catch anymore. There was also a huge emphasis on minigames in Rebirth, which I can get why some people might be turned off by. However, as someone who did enjoy a lot of the minigames and was impressed with just how much content was in the original game, I really liked a lot of these. The best one by far is the addition of Queen's Blood, a card game in which players pit their handcrafted decks against each other from all over the traversable world. This was kind of reminiscent of Gwent from The Witcher 3, and I'm a sucker for card games. I really love dueling it out in Queen's Blood. I got excited whenever I'd find a booster pack I could buy to put more cards into my pool of cards I could make a deck out of. And I just enjoyed interacting with all the wacky characters that are out there waiting to play. There's chocobo races, the Coliseum-like battle arena at the Gold Saucer, a G-Bike minigame, and many other puzzles and minigames worked into the game's main questline. These were a welcome addition for me, as it really brought back that coziness of older video games, games that would just throw a bunch of ideas at the wall to see what would stick. So while some of the side content may feel a bit fetchy or boring in nature, I think that their insistence on providing information, whether it be about the world or the characters, really boosted how much this game's side content can be enjoyable. This, coupled with the expansive list of minigames, gave this game a lot of personality. All things considered, gameplay is really solid here. I really have no complaints. I found it to be really fun, and while some people might think the minigames are padding, to me, I didn't really ever feel like they hindered my experience too much. I enjoyed this game from a gameplay standpoint. I want to give a spoiler warning here, as I'm going to talk about a big point of this story as well as a little bit of Remake story as well. While I won't go too into detail about it, mentioning this part of Rebirth story is spoiler enough. If you want to skip this part of the review, go ahead to this timestamp. Okay, let's talk about the story of Rebirth. Remake ended with Cloud and the gang taking on a Guardian of Fate and defeating it, causing the once set path of the future to be uncertain now. The party have fled to the town of Calm, where Cloud fills them in on the night that Sephiroth burned down the village and slaughtered his people. Cloud tells them of Sephiroth's descent into madness, which he gets glimpses of throughout the narrative through these headache-driven flashbacks. The gang then set off to follow the black-robed men who were featured in the first game a little bit, as they are somehow tied to Sephiroth. This sees them traveling the world in search of the once great soldier to stop him from making progress in his plans to become a god. They face many hardships along the way, from fiends and the ever-annoying and present Shinra, to solving the mysteries of history in an effort to get ahead of Sephiroth, who always seems to be just out of reach. This title did some great work in reconceptualizing things that happened in the original game, such as what happened in Nibelheim, post-Sephiroth, and Mother World Tour era, that made it make a bit more sense to me at least. I also enjoyed seeing the way that the team handled Cloud and Sephiroth's relationship, and how throughout the story Cloud continues to have flashbacks of his past and struggles to control himself as Sephiroth continues to erode his sense of self and memory. For the most part, much of this story is the same as the original, if not altered a bit for context to align with some of the new changes they've made. Now, those changes themselves are pretty massive, and I can totally understand why the biggest of these changes turned some fans of the original game off. The biggest change we see in Rebirth is the existence of a multiverse that splintered back when Cloud and the gang fought and defeated the fated Destiny giant whisper thing back in Remake. From this, multiple timelines have sprouted whose events are wildly different than the main original game's timeline. This caused some OG fans to lose their shit, and like I said, I get it. Overall, I was okay with this decision after I got to the end, but initially, there was some sense of like certain things happening in previous entries in the Final Fantasy VII compilation universe not meaning as much as they had initially, as they essentially could just be retconned out with the existence of a multiverse. This is something I don't really enjoy in fantasy as a genre of media, whether it be books, games, movies, or TV. It's like that feeling you get when they constantly pump fake the death of a big character and then their meaning and the emotions around their death literally don't matter anymore when they pop back up later. Initially, as the story unraveled, I did feel that way about some of the inclusions and changes that they made, but by the ending of the game, when things became more clear, I didn't get the vibe that everything has just been undone. I can't really say a ton more than that without just straight up saying what it is that happens. But what I can say is, it appears as only one main party character by the end is aware of these other timelines, and that the main events of the original story is the timeline that we are in based on the emotions and attitudes of the other party members at the end of the game. So how did I overall feel about the story? I enjoyed the narrative of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth quite a bit. I like this new direction, and I'm okay with this being a retelling with new additions and changes in direction. However, I am also okay with others hating this and feeling like they were lied to when Square said that this was a remake of the original game. These story changes are pretty big, and while I might have enjoyed this remake trilogy as a separate thing from the original game, I think just shitting on other people who are not feeling this new direction is kind of just a waste of breath. Everyone's allowed to feel how they want about this story. What I can say is, this game and Amori have been two of the only games that have ever gotten a tear out of me. Seeing Aerith's backstory just kind of hit home for me, what with Father's Day being around the time I got to that part of the game, and that being a somber day of remembrance for my son. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth did a great job of covering the portion of the story from the original game that it does, in my opinion. And despite an initial disappointment with the multiverse thing, with how the game ended, I think, at least for me, it's just too premature to see what this means for the story as a whole to just throw out the whole series. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a game that built strongly upon not only the strengths of its first title, but ironed out a lot of its weaknesses as well. This game made me excited to go back and keep playing the older Final Fantasies that I missed, as well as the future of the series. Aside from some generic map exploration content, the side content is far more engaging. The amount of things to do has gone drastically up, but those inclusions are fun and flesh out our characters really well in a lot of ways. The combat is as exciting and fluid as ever, with the materia system, folios, synergy moves, and the ATB bar, adding a layer of strategy to the action combat. Yes, there are some rough spots within the game, such as the graphics being a bit rough because of the lighting, and how sometimes there are some texture pop-ins or sounds that destroy every other audio track. This game's narrative also isn't going to be for everyone, and that's totally okay. The bottom line is, it's okay to love this game. Is it a perfect game? No. In my opinion, it's a very good game, with enough that kept me excited for the nearly 60 hours it had me in its palm of its little greasy paw again. God, I just could not get out of the Final Fantasy VII universe this past month. It's also okay to hate this game. It's a game that took some risks, knowing how volatile and loyal the fanbase of just this specific Final Fantasy game alone can be. And some of those risks are going to be too much for those people, and that's fine. Is it the worst game ever? Hardly. Either side of the spectrum does have some truth to some of their arguments and have made valid points. But what isn't okay, however, is attacking others because they don't align with your opinion of pixels on a screen, or belittling other people's experiences and opinions because you feel like different is threatening. At the end of the day, there are some objective things that we can judge video games on, but overall, our opinions are subjective, meaning that there isn't a right way or wrong way to feel about this game. Each person gets to decide what's right or wrong for them. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to take a long break from the Final Fantasy VII universe after my nearly 2-month stay here. I've played these games back to back to back, and I think it may actually be time to finally start something new. But last time I said that, I played Remake and Rebirth back to back, so who knows, maybe I'll play Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus next. Until the next review, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps out my channel, and let me know what you guys thought about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care of yourself. Peace.